We are in Daniel this morning, and we've been talking about commitment, and we looked at Moses and the commitment that he had to have and make, and how a lot of believers really lack in commitment today. So if this lesson today is something that you've enjoyed or do enjoy, go back and watch last week during Sunday school or the week before during Sunday school to try to get the whole thing. Sunday nights we're doing a series on Bible study, how to study your Bible. So if that's something that's interesting, try to go back and rewatch the other ones. I guess that's one of the other nice things about having this recorded is if there's something you need, you can go back and watch it. Oftentimes some of my favorite preachers that I watch or listen to, they'll say, "Oh, I preached on this several years ago, go get the tape or go listen to it on the internet." Well, I guess we can do that here now too. Go back and listen to it. So, commitment. Last week we talked about Moses, an excellent example of commitment. Anybody remember how old Moses was when he started his ministry? Anybody remember? 80. Yes, 80 years old. He lived in Egypt till he was 40, and then God sent him to the back side of the desert for another 40 years. So a lot of preparation, but he still had to have that commitment to the Lord that whole time. Today we're going to look at Daniel. This is probably something you've heard preached on many times. I remember growing up in the Christian school. For some reason, it seems like people preached on Daniel quite frequently. So I start rereading this and start having flashbacks to chapel. But Daniel chapter 1. We'll start reading there in verse 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz. This Ashpenaz is kind of an important guy. His name's mentioned here a few times, so kind of keep that in the back of your head. The king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that's another key point of information there, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time they might serve before the king. Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You might know those three get men better as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. To them, the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belshazzar, and then those three names that I just mentioned. So I kind of jumped ahead of myself there a little bit, didn't I? So over the years, I've had to read for Bible college and seminary, and I've gone to different seminars, and they recommend books occasionally. So a lot of the books that they recommend are leadership-type books. And sometimes they recommend secular books. Sometimes they mention Bible-based books. And one of the questions that commonly comes up, whether it's a biblical book or a secular book, is why do some people achieve so much and others don't? A very common question. Why do some people achieve so much and others don't? And some people say, well, is it talent? It's because these people have so much more talent? Is that why they achieve so much? Or maybe it's their enthusiasm. You know, they're just really excited about it and they're trying to push for it. Or is it hard work? You know, the hardest working people are ones that achieve the most. Well, a lot of these books analyze different successful people, and sometimes people with very little talent Maybe sometimes people who are even what we would consider lazy end up as very successful. So you got to ask, what is it really that makes people so successful? Well, here's another question along those same lines. How can two children from the same family be so different? How is that possible? I mean, how can two people sit in the same church pew, listen to the same message over and over and over, and one person be really on fire for the Lord, what we would say on fire for the Lord, and the other is just kind of existing, not really doing much? Well, I think maybe the answer to all these questions is motivation. How can one person achieve so much and the other person not? It's motivation. And a lot of these books say that. We got to work on motivation. And motivation, if you have motivation, it can overcome a lack of talent. And motivation, though, how do you get that motivation? That's often a question that these books present. How do you get this? Well, everybody is motivated by something different, aren't they? Everybody's motivated by something different. Some people are motivated by approval. Well, if I get a lot of approval and a lot of people, complimenting me and things like that, then I'm motivated to do more. Well, other people say that they are motivated by promotion and more money. I was talking to a guy recently, and he's like, I just wish I could get a raise. I've never got a raise. In the last 2 years, I've never got a raise. He says, well, you mess up all the time. I'm like, you mess up 3 or 4 times a week. And he says, well, if I had a raise, I wouldn't mess up. I'm like, I don't think life works that way. I don't think it works that way. And so some people, they're motivated by more money. Other people, they're motivated by how they look. They get up in the morning and they look in the mirror and they're excited and it makes them feel better and they're motivated. Well, everybody is motivated by something different. And the question we need to consider this morning is, what motivates God's people? Right? Because that's who we are. We're just sojourners here on earth. We're citizens of heaven. We are God's people. What motivates God's people? Let's kind of go around the room and see if anybody has any answers for that. What motivates God's people? Or what should motivate God's people? Anybody?
Thinking about your reward in heaven.
Thinking about a reward in heaven. Yeah. The storing up, Jesus talked about it, right? Storing up treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt. I guess I have it memorized in King James. Anybody else?
Love for him.
Love for the Lord should motivate us because He loved us first, died for us, paved this way to heaven for us. We should love Him and be motivated. Anything else?
Desire to be a better person.
Desire to grow more like Christ.
Yep.
Yeah, to be better. Yeah. Anything else? No.
Do all things as unto the Lord. So whatever you're doing.
Whether you eat or drink, do everything for the glory of God. So glorifying God should be a motivation, right? Yeah, that's a good one. Anybody else? What should motivate God's people? Well, I've heard a lot of really good answers. How about this one? Obedience. A desire to obey. A desire to obey. How about this one? A desire, a motivation to fulfill our commitments to Him. Maybe, Don said love for Jesus. Well, unfortunately, sometimes we have this weird concept of love because we're flawed human people, and sometimes love isn't really enough, and we have to make a commitment, and we have to have this motivation that I want to obey God, I want to obey Jesus Christ, and no matter what.
I think fearing the Lord too, you don't want to be under His wrath and discipline and stuff, and
Actually, that's a good one.
Fear?
Yeah. I mean,
and
you know,
respect. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one.
sometimes we do the right thing even if it doesn't feel right or seem right or we want to do it because it's the right thing to do.
So that fear would be a motivation
Yeah.
to obey.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So look in Daniel here. We're going to see what motivated Daniel and see if that can help us at all or encourage us. Now, if you recall, Israel's been invaded and destroyed. Now, we read that verse 1:1, and it's kind of like nonchalant. Nebuchadnezzar came in and besieged Jerusalem. It's like, oh, that's not really a big deal. Well, it was total destruction, right? There was thousands of people killed, and all the healthy young people and all the spoils, anything worth anything, pretty much was taken back to Babylon. And Daniel and his 3 friends basically have had everything that they know destroyed and everyone that they love murdered. They had seen people tortured. There's other places that talk about Babylon's invasion, places like some of the other prophets that describe it more. One of the things that they would have seen is Nebuchadnezzar loved to burn people's eyes out. They would heat up these pieces of metal and hold you down and burn your eyes out as torture. They would have these big vats where they would have water and throw people in and boil them as a way to kill them. I mean, this is all in the historical record in the scriptures. And when verse 1 says they besieged Jerusalem, these are the things that they were doing. Okay? Outright death, destruction, torture. And this is who the Babylonians were. This is what they did. Now they're grabbing people and taking all the young men, especially probably women, and they're taking them back. And they show up. They're in Babylon. They're in the heart of the city of Babylon, surrounded by the enemy that they had just watched kill all their family and friends. And they must know in the back of their minds that if they mess up, what might happen? Same. Right? They saw Uncle Frank get his eyes burned out and saw somebody else boiled alive. They're like, we better not mess up, right? That's that fear, that motivation to obey this King Nebuchadnezzar, because at the slightest mistake, we could be tortured. And one of the things that happens is verse 5. They're given the king's delicacies of wine to drink on a daily basis. So this diet was very interesting in that, I'm sure you've heard this before, in that this meat would have been offered to the Babylonian gods. So it was tainted by, according to the Jewish religion, they shouldn't be drinking this. And wine as well. I mean, a good Jewish young man should not be drinking large amounts of wine. I mean, maybe a little bit here and there they would drink, and it was a very low grade, not very alcohol, not a high percentage of alcohol. But this, what they faced with here, is something totally different, something they are not used to. I mean, they're supposed to drink this high-grade wine and eat this meat offered to idols basically at every meal. So this diet is going to violate their religious standards. I mean, they got to eat this food offered to idols and obey the King Nebuchadnezzar that could kill them and torture them at any moment, or obey God. I mean, that's their choice. I mean, they're living in the middle of Babylon, but how can they still be loyal to their Lord? Verse 8. Look at this. It says, Daniel purposed in his heart that he should not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. So that motivation for Daniel to be loyal to God, it was obedience to God. That was his motivation. It was obedience. He had purposed in his heart that he was going to obey God and fulfill the commitment that he had made to the Lord. Well, how was Daniel going to do this? Well, Daniel had to know in his heart that God was the one true God, right? Not all these idols that are around. He had to be willing to continue to worship God, even though he's surrounded with all this nonsense going on in the city. He had decided that he was going to be loyal and obedient to God and affirm his love for God no matter what. Now, it's easy to get distracted from that. It's easy to get distracted. But Daniel's purposed in his heart that he's going to obey God 100%. He's determined within himself not to violate God's commands. He refuses to compromise. And everything's pointing to the motivation of obedience. Now, do you think Daniel prayed along the way? God, help me to obey you. I mean, we know later on in the book that it was his habit to pray at least 3 times a day. He scheduled 3. So I'm sure he prayed, God, will you help me obey you regardless of the consequences? I mean, I don't know, that's not recorded in Scripture. I'm just kind of guessing. But I think that's a good prayer, and maybe the question should be, have you ever prayed, God, I will obey you regardless of the consequences? I mean, that's a huge thing, obedience to God. That was a massive motivation for Daniel. There's another, direction. Direction. Now, when they decided to obey, I think they probably prayed. They were probably seeking wisdom from the Lord, and suddenly it came to them, right? Suddenly the Lord gave them direction. Look at verse 14. So he's purposed in his heart, verse 8, that he will not eat all this stuff. Verse 11. So Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies. As you see fit, so deal with your servants. So he consented with them in this matter and tested them in 10 days. So they've decided they're going to obey God no matter what. They've probably prayed, Lord, help us get this. And then all of a sudden, the Lord gives them direction. Opens up a door, gives them an idea of what to do. When they decided to obey, this idea came to them, right? Allow us to obey God and then see how we look at the end of 10 days. God gave them that wisdom. God gave them that direction. They were completely submitted to the Lord. They were obedient to the Lord. And then God gave them clear direction. Wouldn't that be motivating? Isn't that motivating when you have a clear direction? Like God opens a door. Like, oh, wow, okay, let's go. You know, when we receive clear direction from the Lord, that is a great motivator. You know, that's one reason why prayer and Bible reading is so important, because that's how we can receive direction from the Lord. You know, it's no wonder a lot of Christians don't have any clue which way to go. They're not obedient, they're not reading the Bible, they're not praying, and then they have no direction. No direction. I remember there's been times in my life where I had clear direction. I don't know if you've ever had that, just really clear direction. I was in Iowa, and I resigned from the church, and I was a little bit nervous about stepping down from that because it was my first pastor job and whatnot. And I went out and bought this little, you remember those signs? They're like this big that says for sale in orange with the black background. Did they even make them anymore?
Yeah.
I bought one of those and I put my cell phone number on it and I put it in my window of my house. The next day, somebody came and bought it for the asking price. It's like, I was a little bit nervous about leaving the church and all that stuff, And it was like, wow, that's pretty clear direction. You know, to sell your house without a realtor, without paying all those extra fees. The next day, literally, I had an offer. And talk about clear direction, and that's motivation on top of motivation, I guess, is when something like that happens. So question, will you always like God's clear direction? No, right? Now, if we just said our only motivation was God's direction, that might be not motivating, but we combine that with what? Obedience. So even if we don't like the direction, we can always fall back on obedience. Right? Excellent motivations. Obedience and direction. Here's a third motivation, verse 15. At the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Thus the steward took away their portion. Wouldn't that be stink?
Oh, yeah.
Like all the other guys would be like, where's my steak? Well, you got to eat eggplant. Sorry. I want my steak back. The steward took away their portion of delicacies and gave the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. As for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. The third motivation is discovering what God can do in your life. Discovering what God can do in your life. So God has overwhelmingly proved himself, right, to Daniel and his 3 friends. Wouldn't that motivate you? Like, we're going to make this deal with the Ashkenaz for 10 days, and they look in the mirror and they look better than they've ever looked in their lives. I mean, the deal worked. I mean, that would motivate you as you discover what God can do in your life. And you might think, what might you think? What else could God do if I remain committed and obedient to him? I mean, have you ever asked God what he could do through you if you were totally committed, obedient, and devoted to him? Lord, what could you do? That thought of discovery, it should excite us and should motivate us. But what do we do a lot of times? We go back to playing that excuses game like Moses. Well, I can't talk, and I'm old, and I'm this, and I'm that. It doesn't matter what the excuse is, because God can use you. And once you discover how he can use you, it should kind of start snowballing and getting bigger and bigger and make more and more motivated to obey. God, I am committed to obeying you regardless of circumstances, and just discover what he could do. Pastor Stanley made an interesting statement. He said, the real question isn't what God can do. We know what God can do. He created everything. The question is, what will he do if I commit to obeying him fully? I thought that was interesting. Have you ever decided whatever God wants you to do, you're going to do it? That obedience to God, if you do that, it may seem scary, you may not like it, but that when you're obedient to God, that is probably the safest place you can possibly be. Now, it might take a leap of faith. But if you're landing in God's hands, you're safe. Oh, I'm already on page 3. I thought I was going slower than that. Another motivation. Skip ahead to Daniel 6. I said we were going to go there. This is another motivation. Okay, Daniel 6. So there's a new ruler. This is many years later. Daniel's a much older man by this point. Nebuchadnezzar has gone crazy, and he came back for a while, but then died, and his son took over, and his son was really arrogant, and he was having a party one night. Do you remember that? And the hand of God wrote on the wall, "You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Many, many tickle you Pharisee." For me to remember all these things, I've heard this Daniel preached on so many times. I've read it so many times, I just remember it. But remember Darius? They invaded the city because they stopped the river and they went under the wall where the river flowed. And anyway, Darius is king in a very powerful kingdom. And it pleased Darius to set over the kingdoms 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom. So he's got this massive bureaucracy, sort of judges or rulers, governors over all these different areas. And there was 3 governors over the 120 satraps. And Daniel was one of them. So a lot of times, right, if you're the new president, if you're the new king, you bring all your own new administration, don't you? Well, Daniel was so good. He retained him from the previous administration. Well, what do you think that's going to do with all Darius's buddies?
Yeah.
They're going to be here. What? I'm not a governor. I was in line to be governor. Like, I thought as soon as Darius took over Babylon, I was going to be governor. Well, Daniel was retained and kept as one of the governors, and those 120 satraps had to give an account to Daniel. Verse 3, "Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king gave thought to setting him over the entire realm." Wow. He's going to be in charge of everything. Verse 4, "So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, 'We shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God.' So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, 'King Darius, live forever.' All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors had consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish this decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter.' Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree." Now, Daniel, being high up, maybe they snuck him when he wasn't around and got this, but he quickly heard what the ruling was. See, verse 10 tells us that. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he's already determined in his head that he's going to obey God, and part of that, over years of steady obedience, was seeking God's face in prayer and looking for wisdom. He went home in his upper room with his window open towards Jerusalem. He knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God, and they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. "Have you not signed a decree that every man petitions any god or man within 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?" The king answered and said, "The thing is true according to the law of Medes and Persians, which does not alter." So they answered and said before the king that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself. And he set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, Know, O king, that this is the law of the Medes and Persians, that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed for 30 days. Remember? That was earlier up there. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, listen to this, saying to Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. Wow, isn't that crazy? This secular king was so confident that Daniel's God would deliver him. I just find that kind of amazing. So Daniel, under a new king, new administration, new policies, new direction, he's still elevated to second in command. Of course, all the others are jealous. We've already gone over that. And began to look for ways to accuse Daniel. They want to get at him some way. And the only thing they could find to attack was his prayer life. I guess that's another application question. Could somebody attack your prayer life? Like, you pray often enough where somebody's like, that's the only thing I can get them on.
Back at college, when I had roommates and stuff, you know, like Christians always say, oh, first thing in the morning you need to wake up and do your devotions and this and that. Well, I was already waking up at like 5 a.m. to get ready for breakfast and classes and stuff, so I would do it more in the evening, you know, when the, the dorms were more empty and quiet and stuff. And my roommate said that I wasn't spiritual when I was doing it wrong because I should be doing it in the morning.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Huh.
Not evening. I like boys better.
Yeah.
Sometimes I would do it. Sometimes I do it in the morning if I had time in the classroom, if I get there before everybody else and whatever. But it's just funny how even Christians criticize when you do devotions and pray and this and that.
I had a teacher in high school tell a story similar to that he was reading the Bible in the evening, and somebody came up to him and said, well, you should be reading that in the morning. Mm-hmm. And he says, well, I did read it this morning, and this is just a midnight snack. And kind of got the guy, but anyhow, yeah. The only thing they could find to attack was his prayer life. And you see 3 times a day, that was his custom. So they get the king to pass this law, and I just read it, you've heard the story, you know it. That the only person you can talk to, like ask a petition or a favor or help or for wisdom or whatever, the only person you can pray to for 30 days was the king. So Daniel knew about the law, and what did he do?
Prayed anyway.
Prayed anyway. You looked at my notes, that's exactly what I wrote. Prayed anyway. What?
Well, I mean, it's, you know, God had all this happen, obviously, so, I mean, he can show his power, but it's still, in your head, you're like, if the king practically had faith himself that God was who he is, then how was he skewed by those clowns that told him to do it in the first place like that?
I think they buttered him up. They buttered him up and like, oh, just for 30 days we're going to do this. And, you know, and he probably thought, oh, yeah, that sounds cool. I get all this praise and adoration for 30 days. I mean, who would turn that down? And then when he realized that it was a setup, he's like, he worked all day and all night trying to get Daniel out of it, and he wasn't going to be able to get him out of it. So he brings him in or has him arrested, right? And it's going to about to push him in. He's like, I know your God will save you. Right? That's kind of, isn't it interesting?
Twisted, yeah, I mean,
Yeah. It's definitely interesting. But, so Daniel prays anyway, even though he knew that the law was there, because Daniel knew prayer was necessary for his success. He knew prayer was necessary for his success, and he wasn't going to stop. He was not going to stop no matter what. He prayed anyway. Daniel arrested, sentenced, tossed into the lion's den. Verse 16, the king was confident. So what's this motivation here? Did I even say it? Our motivation is our witness to others. The final motivation is our witness to others. What kind of witness did Daniel have for the king to say, I know God's going to deliver you? Right? That should be a massive motivation for us in this world, is our witness for others. We can talk about our obedience to God. We can talk about discovering what He can do through us. We can talk about all those other motivating factors. But I think our witness should be another motivating factor. I know it's motivated me at different times throughout my life. I'm not going to do this or I'm not going to do that because, it might affect my testimony or hurt Christ's reputation. So I need to do this or I need to do that. In fact, I remember I was sitting around a campfire. I got invited to this college-age activity one time, and I went to it, and there was all these people sitting around a campfire, and I was talking about our witness. And one young man kind of said, well, I'm going to have to quit my job because I've already ruined my testimony with those people, and I need to get a new job and uphold the testimony of Christ at the new job. And all these other people around the campfire started confessing how they hurt their witness and testimony to Christ. And it really, all those different people bearing their heart out kind of really did affect me that night. Our witness should be a motivating factor to live for Christ, to obey Christ, to be a success. And it motivated Daniel, right? I'm gonna do this no matter what. I'm gonna be a witness no matter what. And it helped him, motivated him. And I think that should be a motivation for us as our witness. Like Daniel, we have the only message that will transform the world. Okay. A lot of people talk about a lot of different things, don't they? Oh, we need to do this. Oh, we need the Green New Deal. We need this. We need that. That's the only thing that's going to help. We need to allow this and that. That's a bunch of malarkey, really. The only thing that's going to transform the world is Jesus Christ. And witnessing to that fact, that should be a motivating factor to all of us. And Daniel there. We got a couple minutes. Anything else anybody thought of or whatnot? No.
When Darius talks about he's confident that Daniel's God will deliver him, and then he makes a decree in verse 25 about Daniel's God is the God. Do you think that means that Darius really became a believer then and changed, or does it? I don't know. I'm just curious.
He could have. He could have. Yeah, because it's a long decree, a big decree. Yeah, He is the living God, right? He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. Yeah, he might have. Who knows? He might have believed.
Well, if he did, then maybe a lot of people in that country did too, at least for a while.
Because of Daniel. Yeah. Anything else?
You would think, though, a bigger testimony would be, because you were talking about, I'd have to leave my job, because I've already ruined my testimony and stuff. I think a bigger testimony would be going back to that job and showing them how God has changed your life.
Well, that's what I told that young man. I think that night, I don't know, I was 24 or 25. I was fairly young at the time, but he was 19 or 20. And I says, no, I don't think you should quit your job. I think we did talk about that. But yeah, good point. Thank you. Anything else?
I guess one thing that I think of is Daniel could have continued to pray, like he continued to pray so people could see him doing that. So we need to be aware that everything that we're doing, people are seeing.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're doing things, we need to see the big picture of are what we doing honoring and edifying God, or are there things that we are doing that could be hindering?
And somebody sees that.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you. Dawn.
When I was in college, Terry and I were married.
That was just a few years ago, right?
Yeah, a couple. Or 3 or 4. I worked at Michigan National Bank,
Uh-huh.
and I was upstairs in the mobile home department. And there was a girl that started probably 3 years after I did. And I can't remember the name. We called it Grisboom. It was another Christian college, a Baptist college in Grand Rapids. It was quite small, but it was quite fundamental too. And this gal got a job in the same department that I did. And she was just a little sweetheart of a girl. I mean, you had to kind of like her, and I did. Her and I got along fine. But she was taught in school that she had to be this witness. She had to witness to everybody on our floor. And I think on our floor there was 100 and some workers. And she just was, it was just constantly boom, boom, nag, nag, nag like. And the people got to where they wouldn't listen to her.
Mm.
And I just prayed about it because she was really a sweet girl.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she had good ideas,
Mm-hmm.
but she took that too far and was cramming the gospel down their throats, so to speak. And I said, Lord, I don't want to hurt her. I don't know what to say to her.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, some of the bigwigs said, you got to stop pounding your religion.
Mm-hmm.
Dawn doesn't pound her religion here.
Mm.
And I got thinking about that, and I said, Lord, I do, but I don't.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, everybody knows where I am. And I just said, Lord, I don't know what to do with it. You take care of this, because I don't want her hurt, and I don't want my testimony hurt here.
Uh-huh.
And finally, I realized that she was kind of shutting up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And people were coming to me and saying, well, what about this? She keeps saying this, and she keeps saying that. It opened up a whole new world for me on that floor.
Mm.
I couldn't get over that. I mean, they asked the question, so they had to listen to my answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said, Lord, you open my mouth when you want it open, and shut it when you don't want it shut. And I had just amazing opportunities to witness because they asked me the questions.
Hmm.
And so I don't know, maybe the Lord used it that way, used her in a way to get their attention. But yet they came to me not really wanting an answer, but wanted my opinion.
Mm.
Well, I gave them the Bible's opinion.
Yeah.
And I don't know how far I went, but I said, Lord, you take it wherever you want it to go.
Right.
So, you know, just be conscious of what you're doing and let the Lord lead.
Right. Good.
Well, it's like they say, your life is the only Bible some people will ever read. And they used to say that about my dad. My uncle pounded it into everybody, and my dad lived it. And they enjoyed seeing my dad come. And, you know, because he didn't, he just lived it. He just, you know, and it was much more powerful.
That's what I found with those people I worked with, because, some of them were rough. They were rough. Their language was foul. And,
At a bank?
huh?
At a bank?
Oh, yeah. See, we weren't with the public, we were upstairs. And so it was, everybody we dealt with was on the phone. And they knew, I had the testimony, shut your mouth with that language when you found out she didn't like it. So it just, and I didn't have to say anything either.
If you think the language is bad at a bank, go work at a concrete plant.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
Well, Tom was not saved when we got married, but I thought he was. And he eventually did get saved, and he's working at a concrete plant, and they called him Reverend Boots and laughed at him. But this has been years and years, that now when there's a problem or somebody's dying or they have a problem, they all come to him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, you know, like everybody's saying, like, just living it. I think it depends on, people can sense attitude, people can sense, like, I don't know, motivation or approachability, or, you know, whether you're living your life, how you're preaching it, or whatever. And I think that determines people's directions and who they go talk to, or, you know, how they seek that out and whatever. Like, they heard it from the one girl, but decided to go talk to Dawn because maybe they saw her living her life that way, where maybe the other girl wasn't. She was just preaching it, but not, you know, living by example or something. I don't know. But you know what I mean?
She was doing what she had been taught in college, word for word.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't do that. You gotta allow the Holy Spirit to lead.
Yeah.
You know.
So, I remember going over to my mother and father-in-law's house, and some young students pulled up in a car, and they were from Juniata Baptist Church, and they were going around talking to people about coming to church and trying to, you know, move the word of salvation or whatever. I said, go on in and eat it. That they went there ever since they were young.
Yeah.
You know, my mother and father-in-law, but they went on in. Go on in, they need it. Take care of them.
Yeah.
But I used to mess with my father-in-law quite a bit.
Well, let's pray. Father God, we're thankful for this opportunity and to study your word. We're thankful for the example that Daniel left for us, and it's recorded in your word. And thank you for this discussion that's been going on here. And Lord, help us to grow closer to you, first and foremost. In Jesus' name, amen.